Is this too informal to do a video with the hat on? I don't know. I'm waiting for my barber to text me back about a haircut. So shout out to Saputo though. Support those that support you. If you're new here, thanks for stopping by. I appreciate it. I post weekly updates of what it's like to work in an architecture office, as well as other things like 3D printing, sketching, anything related to architecture and design. So if you find that kind of stuff interesting, consider subscribing down below and let me know what else you want to see from me. Alright, so let's get into this week's work. Last week I left off with some headaches about my daycare facility project, and I had a meeting out on site this week to go over some electrical issues before they start putting the lights in. So what came of this meeting is I have to add more access panels in the ceiling so that the electrical subcontractor can get up into the attic and more easily install some electrical components for the lighting. So the reason we have to do this is because we're installing a hard finish ceiling, not one of those squared grid T-bar ceilings that you normally see. With those grid ceilings, you're able to just push and pop the tiles out so that way you can access the attic up above. Any sort of maintenance or electrical components are easily accessible in those grid ceilings. If we didn't add these access panels to the ceiling, the electrical subcontractor would have a really tough time navigating the attic to install the components they need. So we're adding a new one here in the printer area, and we're adding another one here in this storage room. Shout out to you electrical guys out there. I know you guys have it tough, so we tried to make this job a little bit easier for you. So following that meeting out on the site, the contractor sent me a formal RFI, and this is a request for information. And they'll send these to get us to respond formally to questions they have out in the field. And this is important to do, that way you can memorialize the answers and you can look back at them later on after construction and say, this is exactly why we changed this, because you asked this question or we had this problem out in the field, and here's the exact response as to how we handled this problem. All right, so on last week's episode of the weekly wrap up, I was working on those new school projects that I had. Well, we sent out the schematic design packages to all the principals of those schools, and this week we had meetings with all of them so we could go over the plans and see their thoughts on them. So these were all Zoom meetings. I'm sure you guys are very familiar with Zoom meetings. We do them in our office for the most part. We still do some in-person meetings, like when I have to go out on site and see things. I can't do a Zoom meeting for that, but other things we can do Zoom meetings for. Everything went pretty well for these meetings. The principals liked the designs. We were on the same page about the entrance and how everything was going to function, except for one. This principal was not easy to please. She didn't like the plan. She didn't like where her office was. It was just a difficult meeting. To be fair, it wasn't entirely her fault. After I went back and I looked at the plan a second time, I realized there was some wasted space in the waiting area and the reception area, and I figured out a way to kind of work the plan a little bit more and get more use out of that wasted space. So what I ended up doing was I took the conference room and I put it in that waiting/reception area, and that freed up a lot of the space at the south end of the building. And what that allowed us to do is we took out an existing wall and we made the principal's office twice as big as it was. I swear, this is the biggest principal's office I've ever seen. It's ridiculous. It shouldn't be this big, but it works. It was actually a really good exercise at space planning to re-look at the plan again. We very rarely get it right the first time. We usually have to go back through the plan a second time to look at where we're kind of wasting space, where we might be more efficient. So hopefully next week when we show the principal her new giant office, she'll be happy with this plan. So I told you last week that I'd get started on designing those roof canopy structures right outside the administration building, and I finally got to do that this week. For me at least, the first step in designing something like this is to conduct a case study. So I conducted a pretty simple case study. I just went on Google and I started looking up roof canopy structures, and I wanted to see how other schools had implemented this in their campuses. So I looked at all these examples and I got to work designing my own version. So the front entry of these schools have this kind of low-hanging single slope roof with these wide column structures underneath them. I took inspiration from this and started designing my roof structure so that I would complement and interact with this existing entry. So I designed this roof structure with these 2 large columns on either side to kind of match the columns next to them. And I put this really cool double pitch roof on top of those columns. So the way this roof structure speaks to the public is it's kind of open and welcoming. With that second pitch to the roof, it's really opening up the entry to the public. So I got to work on this design, and I'm gonna do some rendering so I can send it to the principal and get their feedback on it. So this roof structure is gonna be the same at 2 of these 4 schools. At 2 of these schools, the front entry is pretty much identical. The other 2 schools have very unique entrances, and so those roof structures are gonna be completely different. So that about does it for this week's work. I had a lot of fun getting to design that roof structure, and next week I got 2 more to design. Hopefully I don't have any more headaches from my daycare facility project, but I'm not holding my breath on that one. So stay tuned for next week's episode to see the progress of these school projects, and make sure to check out previous episodes of the weekly wrap up if you want to see where some of these projects got started. So that's going to be it for this week's episode of the weekly wrap up. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.